Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Navigating 2020 and Beyond. Obviously, it's been a pretty interesting year this year that we're having, but we're glad you could all join us virtually via Zoom for our conference. So to get started, my name is Heather Williams. I am the Student Data and Assessment Specialist at the Robbinsdale Adult Academic Program. I am also fortunate enough to serve as the chair of our SPARC group, which is the Support Professionals Advisory and Resource Council. We are a group that meets monthly, typically at MDE, but obviously we've been meeting virtually. And one of the main things that we focus on is planning this conference for support professionals every year. We really pour our heart and soul into this, and I hope everyone really enjoys it. And normally when we're in person, I show this lovely photo of Cashew, but actually I just wanted to show everyone, my little coworker is sleeping behind me, snoring loudly. So if you hear her, I'm sorry for that. And again, I just want to welcome everybody. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And then Gail is also here to support, Gail Rutan is here to support if you're having any sort of tech issues. So welcome, and I will turn it over to Marty.
Good morning. I am Marty Olsen. I'm the program coordinator for Southwest ABE-South, based out of Worthington, and I also manage the Supplemental Services Assessment Training Grant that's held by Southwest ABE. And the main focus of our grant is to provide training on administering CASAS and TABE, and we also support the work of SPARC, so that puts me right here. We support SPARC and therefore the Support Services Conference. So this year's virtual conference is definitely a first for all of us and for this conference, but it's going to be a great day. We also, as SPARC, support and administer the Support Professionals Certificate. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can learn about it you can see the address here, www.mnabeassessment.com. You can check out for more information there, or you can contact me. My email address is there, or our SPARC chair, Heather, to get more information about that. So welcome. We're glad that so many of you are here to join us today virtually. Have a great day.
Good morning, everybody. This is Brad Hasskamp, the Interim State Adult Education Supervisor and Director with the Minnesota Department of Education. And I'm here with my colleague, Jodi Versaw, and we're happy to give you a couple of updates on the state of adult education in Minnesota. Before we do that, I do want to give a big thank you to all of the SPARC committee for the conference planning and all of the work that you've done to put today on and to really adjust as we shifted from an in-person conference to a virtual conference. So thank you to Heather, our conference chair and our committee chair. I also want to thank Atlas for providing all of the technical support for today. So thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Patsy. And we really appreciate all of your expertise in helping to make this a wonderful virtual conference. Thank you also to Marty Olsen and Southwest ABE as our state adult education assessment trainer and conference host for today. I also want to give a big thank you to all of the presenters, the tech hosts, and co-hosts. And thanks to all of you for coming today. I hope we make it a great day with lots of rich information and great discussion and a chance to connect with one another on this not so ominous Friday the 13th. So I've already introduced myself as the Interim State ABE Director. Joining us during this time will also be Jodi Versaw, with Adult Education Program Quality. Julie is our Transition Specialist. Sherry is our Administrative Support. Astrid Leiden is our Professional Development Specialist. Alice Smith, many of you might know her as our GED Record Specialist. And I don't know if all of you know this, but Todd Wagner is back. We've been able to hire him back on as an adult education and high school equivalency test specialist. So he is joining us part-time to help us with some of the workload until we're able to get our team fully hired and fully staffed. I also want to make sure that we thank and acknowledge all of our support network providers for the work that they do to help programs across the state with their work. Literacy Minnesota with technology and volunteer training, Atlas with professional development, Literacy Action Network with program quality and administrator support, Southwest ABE with assessment training, Panda with disability resources and assistance, and the Minnesota Association of Workforce Boards for a lot of our transitions work, including the RTCs, Regional Transitions Coordinator work. So thanks to all of the support network. If you have not engaged with all of these support network providers, and these are topics that are of interest to you or your program where you could use some help, I really encourage you to check them out and to reach out to them for support. During our time this morning, a couple of key adult education updates that we wanted to share with you. We want to talk with you about contact hours and adult education funding. We also want to talk with you about student eligibility with distance learning. We also have some updates regarding assessments and high school equivalency testing. And as we have time, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Please note you can raise questions in the chat while we're presenting, but we may try to get to them while we're presenting, but we may not get to them till we have time for questions towards the end. So please, it's all right if you hold your questions till we have time for Q&A, or feel free to raise them in the chat, but we aren't sure if we'll be able to fully answer all of them while we're presenting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jodi. Jodi, do you want to share with us about contact hours and ABE funding?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jodi Versaw, so I work with Brad on our state ABE team at the Minnesota Department of Education. And we wanted to use this time to give you some kind of updates and reminders about a few things that are relevant to our entire statewide system of ABE or adult education here in Minnesota. We want to start with an update and reminder about contact hours and ABE funding. So we hope that you all are aware at this point of the plan for sort of maintaining stability in our funding, even though contact hours are not stable right now. So the plan is that when we calculate next year's funding, this upcoming year's funding, we are not going to use current contact hours. We will actually reuse the same count of contact hours that we used for this year, which was an adjusted time period. You probably remember we used the contact hours from March 14th to March 14th, 2019 to March 13th, 2020. That's what we used to calculate this year's funding. And we're going to use those same contact hour totals again to calculate next year's funding. So the intent of that is, as long as our state total pot of ABE funding remains the same, then consortia can expect to get the same amount of funding next year as you currently have for this year, regardless of the number of contact hours that were generated. So we just hope that this helps alleviate some stress and some worry about, we know contact hours are down because of the pandemic, but so we've put this plan in place to make sure that we can have stability. However, on the next slide, we are going to also say that we want you to continue and make sure that you are recording those contact hours. So even though the contact hours from the time period we're currently in right now, so we're in the May 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021 contact hour counting period, even though hours from that period, from this period, won't be used to distribute funding, it's still really important that we have an accurate and complete count of hours from that time. And the reason for that is because we use that data about hours for more things than just calculating funding. We also use it for advocacy at the state legislature to try to increase funding for our system. We have to report that statewide total of hours to the federal Department of Education. And we use it to raise awareness with community and with partners. So our message to you in this time is, on the next slide here, Brad, that we want you to continue to serve your learners as best you can. And we know you're doing some unique and different and innovative things right now to reach learners, to communicate with learners, to provide them support and instruction. So keep doing all of those things. And we know that some of those count for contact hours and some of them don't, and that's fine. We want you to focus on serving your learners and your community. And as you are doing that, please continue to record all of those countable contact hours accurately in SID the way you always have. So that's our message to you about funding and contact hours. Then we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about student eligibility and distance learning. So this is a big topic that is coming up a lot because of our current situation. We know that a lot of adult education programming is happening virtually, online, at a distance, far more than ever before, which makes it easier for our programs across the state to be serving students really kind of regardless of where they live or where they are. So we are getting at the state level a lot of questions about this, and I've listed some of the questions that we're getting on this slide. I want to acknowledge we don't necessarily have exact, discrete, specific answers for all of those questions for you right now today, but I want you to know that we are thinking carefully through these issues, and we're interested in knowing from you how and when and why these kind of questions are coming up. And we're in the process of developing a statement and some guidance for our entire field to help us think through these issues in the best way for all of us. So to think about this a little bit, first I want to give you some background on the next slide. As we think about distance learning and serving students in different places, we should all be keeping in mind that as a system, we are funded to serve the state of Minnesota. We get federal ABE funds specifically for the state of Minnesota, and we get state ABE funds that are also specifically for our state. And most consortia across the state are funded to serve a specific geographic place, right? As defined by one or more school districts. And school districts have discrete geographic boundaries. We do have a few ABE programs that serve a special population, like Think South, which focuses on deaf and hard of hearing ABE students, or the Department of Corrections. But for the most part, our system is designed to serve the different geographic areas across our state. Now, that being said, also, there is no residency requirement in current student eligibility policy. There's no prohibition, there's no permission in either way about where a student must or must not be living. So a couple ways historically this has always played out is that many programs near our state border actually serve individuals who live outside the state. For example, we know that Moorhead ABE regularly serves folks who actually reside in Fargo, North Dakota, but they're all members of that same community and that go back and forth across that border all the time. And also many consortia, especially in the Twin Cities Metro, serve students who might actually live in a different ABE consortium. An example might be a student attends class at Hub Center, which is a big ABE center in St. Paul, but that student may actually live in Roseville. Roseville has an ABE program and it's part of a different ABE consortium, not part of the St. Paul consortium, but maybe the student works in St. Paul, so they go to school in St. Paul. Both of those scenarios are totally fine and totally acceptable. So that's a little bit of background. And then as we think specifically about distance learning, we have a few suggestions for things we'd like you all to be keeping in mind as you're serving students in this area. Before the pandemic, we would give people the guideline that if you are serving a student via distance learning, they should be able to physically show up at your building to do intake and a pre-test, and then every 40 to 60 hours for post-testing. Now, we know many programs aren't doing in-person intake at all. Many of you are developing ways to do remote intake or online intake and orientation. We know we're developing some capacity to do remote testing, and we know we have an exemption in SID if you can't give somebody a pre-test. So there are ways to serve a student without them ever physically showing up at your building now as a result of the pandemic. So we just want to offer to you, if you end up in a scenario where you are potentially serving a student in distance learning who lives too far away that they wouldn't realistically be able to come to your building, please keep in mind the following questions. Please think about, where does that student actually live? Where do they reside? And what ABE services are available to them in their home community? And you can use the resources on the Literacy Minnesota website to find that out. And what's the best choice for that student? Should they be attending your program, their home program in their area, or maybe there might be cases where they should be connected to both? So those are some questions we offer to you to think about in that particular scenario. And then lastly, we just want to acknowledge that, as I mentioned, this is an issue and an area we are continuing to think through and work through what exactly our guidance and our support to you all is. We are planning to discuss this more next week at the fall managers meeting. And so maybe a few of you are also attending that event. It could be your supervisor or your manager, your coordinator is going to attend that event. So please be sure to make those connections with those folks after that meeting to learn more about what discussion happened at that event. And our team at the Department of Education, we are working on pulling together a statement that will give you all some guidance about how to think about these issues. But in the meantime, as we're working on that, we welcome your thoughts or ideas about what needs to be addressed specifically, or what unique situations are coming up for you all around this particular issue. So if you'd like to kind of contribute thoughts or ideas or questions, do feel free to reach out to me via email and share those, and just be watching for more information and more guidance on this particularly timely topic right now. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Brad.
Thanks, Jodi. Excellent. So we wanted to next share some assessment updates. We want to let you all know that our current ESL tests that have been approved are continuing to be approved through March of 2023 for another couple of years. So that includes CASAS Life and Work and Best Plus. And the U.S. Department of Education announced that via the Federal Register in August. So what this kind of tells us at this point is it doesn't look like we'll have any big changes happening with our ESL tests in the near future like we originally thought. So this is kind of a wait and see on when new tests will be approved for ESL levels in the NRS. But you at least can continue to use those current tests that you have, and they get a couple more years of life. We also want to remind you about the COVID-19 testing estimate in SID. So you can continue to count hours for students past 12, even if you're unable to pretest them. And make sure that you then use the COVID ABE EFL estimate or the COVID ESL EFL estimate, depending on whether you're wanting to enter the student as an ABE level student or an ESL level student. And then when you enter that, you need to determine a provisional level. And this is based off of an informal assessment that you might give to the student or teacher evaluation or judgment. And then you enter a score of 1 through 6, depending on the provisional level or the guest level that you think that that student should be at, levels 1 through 6 in either ABE or ESL. Our SID support staff at Urban Planet have done a lot of great work, thanks to Mary, thanks to Jenny on the team. So if you have any questions about that and how to enter that in SID or how to do any of that in SID, we encourage you to email support@mnabe.org. We also wanted to let you know that through Southwest ABE, we have purchased more than 25,000 tests to distribute to Minnesota adult education programs. These are computer-based CASAS, and those are called CASAS Goals or CASAS Life and Work Enhanced e-tests, and also computer-based TABE, which is the TABE Online 1112. And these will be available to ABE consortia that have trained staff that set up their CASAS e-testing account or their DRC TABE online accounts, and those that have chosen to participate. So we're happy to share those computer-based tests for you that you might be able to use for in-person testing or remote testing. How we're going to distribute those. In September, we sent a survey to all of the consortia managers. Of the 39 consortia in the state of Minnesota, 33 have chosen to participate. And in round one, we, in November here, Southwest ABE is distributing the first half of this test, so roughly 12,800 tests to consortia. And the number of tests each consortium is receiving is dependent upon your past testing numbers. What did testing look like in March 2019 to March 2020? And then your proportion of testing statewide was used to determine how many tests that you would get. And many consortia are getting anywhere from a couple to maybe a couple thousand in this first distribution. After this first distribution is done, this round one, we will open up a round two, and Southwest ABE and the Minnesota Department of Education will send out an email saying that local programs can request more tests, more computer-based tests, and then we'll continue to distribute those based on the requirements from that email until all of the tests are gone. So we hope that those can be available for you. For those that have never tried computer-based testing, you can try it out. And for those that are already doing computer-based testing, here are some more tests to help you and maybe ease your budgets. We also want to remind you about all of the wonderful assessment professional development. Remember that staff who administer CASAS tests, TABE tests, and BEST Plus tests, they need to be certified in the tests that they work with and recertified every 5 years minimum. And in fact, CASAS is asking for those doing remote testing that maybe be even 3 years. There are new training modules available for staff wanting to administer computer-based testing and remote testing. So talk with our Southwest ABE test trainers who can give you more information about that, or check out their website like Marty pointed out before. Their website is www.mnabeassessment.com. Finally, we want to share a little bit with you about high school equivalency testing and give you an update there. So, reminder for any of you who's working with students or get questions about how do I get my GED record? Some great news. GED records from Minnesota Department of Education can now be emailed. They are not just be sending out via US mail. And in fact, because of our work from home status and supply shortages, we actually prefer to send out records via email. So on the GED records request form, you can feel free, instead of a mailing address, to put an email address, and we will email those records to the address in the email. And those will come via PDF, Adobe PDF. Note that we have seen a delay with records that are sent via US mail, and it may take an additional week or two to be received. Usually still, most records should still be received within a month. There is also, we're seeing a delay with any students that are taking tests via OP or online proctored. This is for students that are taking the GED at home in a video proctored setting. And the reason for that is many of those testing sessions, there are people that have to review the recordings for the test to make sure that the student didn't cheat or that there was nothing wrong or incorrect with how the test was delivered. And because of that, students taking the OP test will see an additional delay of 1 to 2 days before the results are made available to us and before we can issue a diploma. So just note that. We are also seeing an increased number of revoked scores via OP, or students taking the test online proctored. And that is because students are bringing in paper and pencil, writing down questions, having people like in the background that are kind of watching the tests, or they are talking about the test questions out loud where they might potentially be recorded. So just note that please be very cautious when if you have any students that will be taking the test via OP, let your students know that those rules are fairly rigid and that they should be aware of those rules going into the OP testing session. And make sure that for any GED record requests, make sure that those record requests are emailed or faxed. You cannot come to the Minnesota Department of Education at this time to drop off a request or pick up any records. You can always email Alice Smith. Her email address is alice.smith@state.mn.us, or you can fax the request to 651-582-8458. And yes, I see your comment there, Heather. Thank you to Alice for all of the work that she does. She is outstanding, and she works relentlessly and tirelessly to support our GED graduates, even decades after they have graduated. Another update is that the MN-GED 30 code is currently available for GED tests that are scheduled through December 30th, 2020. We are working with admin to extend that contract with GED testing service so that tests in January through June can also receive the subsidy, but we're still working through the contracting process again, and admin has been very reluctant to extend the contract until the competition for high school equivalency assessments is complete. So stay tuned on the extension for the subsidy. Remember though that this subsidy works only for the first time that the student takes the test in that specific subject. And you need to make sure that you're sharing that MN-GED 30 code with your students. And that can work in a Minnesota testing, GED testing center, if a student takes the test via OP, online proctoring, or even if they take the test in a border community where the test has been approved, say like Fargo or Sioux Falls or somewhere like that. I mentioned the high school equivalency assessment competition, or I like to call it the HISEAs. It just sounds far more adventurous that way. The HISEAs competition is definitely underway. All of the posting was posted, applications were received, and now applications are under review. We have a great team of reviewers from the Minnesota Department of Education, from the Department of Corrections, from many various local ABE programs, and from tribal communities that are reviewing these applications and digging into them. These applications are intense. They might be hundreds of pages long each. And so they really need some time to dig into that and make sure they do the best job possible. Because of that, we are anticipating that results will not be available and we won't be able to announce who won the HISEAs competition. It might be one vendor, it might be multiple vendor, but we will be able to announce that sometime in 2021. We're guessing maybe around March or April. And then at that point, we'll have some time to implement the results of that and make sure that if we need to plan any transitions, that we can plan those transitions at that point. So stay tuned. We still have some time to go with this competition. And as always, the HISEAs can be an unknown and they can be rough waters at times, but I'm really excited that our great team of reviewers is working hard on this effort. Okay, so those are kind of the main topics, but we want to make sure that you're staying informed from here forward as well. So hopefully all of you are receiving the MN ABE Connect newsletter. And this is our professional development newsletter. It has so much in there. And if you're not receiving that MN ABE Connect newsletter, we have the sign up here at atlasabe.org/newsletter. Also, info and registration for all of our professional development events can be found on our statewide PD calendar that Atlas hosts at their website, atlasabe.org/events. So hopefully you're checking Atlas regularly for professional developments. And I'm so happy that I get to work with each and every one of you. Our support professionals are the skeleton of our adult education system. You provide the structure. You make sure that we actually have the framework in place so that students can come, that teachers can teach, that administrators can lead and manage and supervise. Like, you are the backbone of our system. You provide the structure, and you are essential to Minnesota adult education. Thank you for your work with administering tests. Thank you for your work with entering data and managing that data. Thank you for your work in taking students and being that first face, that first voice, that first person that the adult student gets to see or gets to interact with when they come to your adult education program. You are so essential to our system. And I hope that you see, and I hope that you see how much you mean to all of us and how essential your work is for all of us. Thank you for working hard and for being that essential connection for our students and for our programs. You really hold it all together. And I'm in awe of everything that you've done, all the innovations that you've done over these past couple of months, with moving to remote intakes, to trying out remote testing, to finding new ways to serve students, to provide orientations to students, to really make sure that the program functions. You are logistics experts, and we are so honored to have your expertise and your real know-how and your dedication to making it work. Thank you so much for all of your efforts. And I will also just say, as a side note, yet again, I think we say this quite often, but this support services conference for support professionals, this is one of the only, I think it's actually the only support professional development event in the nation for adult education providers. So I'm just glad that Minnesota has really recognized all of the hard work that you have done and the essential role that you play in our programs. Thank you all so much. At this point, Jodi, I encourage you to turn your video back on, and we have some time for questions.
So I don't see that we've had too many in the chat yet. I do encourage you, if you have any questions about topics that we've discussed so far, go ahead and stick those questions in the chat. We do have a few minutes here that we could address any of those questions or talk a little bit more about anything that we have mentioned so far. So we'll give you just little bit of time to put any questions into the chat.
Yeah. If you have questions about what we shared in terms of student eligibility and distance learning, in terms of the assessment and the computer-based test distribution, about the HISEAs competition, or about the contact hours and funding, or anything else that you have questions about, we are more than happy to take those questions now.
All right, so I see a question, Brad, that I think you can answer. This is a GED question. If a transcript request is faxed in, about how long before the transcript would be sent out?
Great question, Laura. So typically if a transcript request is faxed in or emailed in, if it is going out via email to an email address, we get those out usually within a week. If it is being mailed out, those usually leave our office within 2 weeks, and then it will take another week to 2 weeks to get received via US mail. So anywhere from 1 week to 1 month, depending on whether we're sending it electronically or via US mail. Great question.
Yep.
Yes, and Alice is doing some tireless efforts there, and she's recruited help at the Minnesota Department of Education from those working on site. It's been a big logistics effort on Alice's part, and I'm just impressed with all the dedication that she shows day after day.
Yes. Any other questions out there? This is where if we were at the conference in person, we would be in our big conference room and we would be running around with a microphone right now saying, who has a question? But instead we're here virtually. So we'll give it another minute, maybe, if there are any other questions this is your chance.
Another question, or this is a comment from Laura about GED transcripts for college admissions should be requested by the student or the college. Great question. Typically, I would say almost 100% of the time, GED transcripts for college admissions need to come from the student. However, the student may fill it out so that it is sent from us to the college directly. Typically, especially if it's sent electronically, they prefer to see it from us. If it's sent via US mail, we'll send it in a secure envelope that's stamped saying official GED transcript, not official if open. So if we send that to the student, then the student cannot open that envelope because then it is no longer official, but they need to immediately forward it onto the college. Sometimes students like to have it sent to themselves just so that they know that it was delivered. But in most cases, it's most secure if it just goes directly to the college.
Yep, that makes sense.
Darla, Jodi wants to appreciate all the work that you did in addressing which students we can serve. And that has come up at her program, RAVE. And they have had requests from outstate and even other countries to learn online.
Yes, Darla, that is exactly what we're hearing from folks all over the state and why we realized we really need to think about that issue. So yeah, I encourage you, Darla, or anybody who has sort of any insight about how have you been making those decisions and what questions are you asking and how are you communicating to students around that? We're definitely interested in hearing, just hearing how that logistically, how it's all playing out in your programs, because we know that there are some questions and new scenarios that we're facing in this time based on that. So feel free to connect with me to discuss some more about specifics if you'd like to, Darla or anyone listening.
Hey, I'm not seeing any other questions.
Nope.
We would maybe just want to encourage everyone, like Jodi noted, if you do have questions, please feel free to email us. Sometimes if you're not sure who to email, emailing Sherry is the best person to email first, and she'll make sure it gets to the right person. But we look forward to talking with you and interacting with you a lot more throughout the year. And we thank you for all of the hard work that you have done over the last couple of months. But in general, you really make education work and our adult education system run. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you to everybody. And thanks for being here.
So I'm going to turn it